Welcome back, everyone. We are diving deep today into something I know we've all been thinking about a lot lately. Trump's second term and what it might mean for Africa. We've got all sorts of stuff to look at. Policy papers, little bits and pieces from the news about oil, even some crypto stuff. So, yeah, let's try to figure out how this whole unexpected election is going to shake things up between the U.S. and Africa.
Well, it really is interesting to see how people have been reacting to Trump winning. Especially you see these African leaders. Some of them sound kind of hopeful, like Mnangagwa in Zimbabwe
Yeah.
or Tinubu over in Nigeria. They're talking about working together. But you can't forget everything that happened the first time Trump was in charge. I mean, the aid cuts,
Yeah.
the immigration stuff, and that shithole countries comment. That's not something people just forget. So it really makes you wonder, will this be a different Trump?
Yeah, that's the big question, isn't it? I mean, it feels like we're starting this whole thing with a big old question mark hanging over us. On the one hand, you've got the stuff that Biden was doing, trying to make Africa a real partner, pouring money into projects like that Libido corridor, that huge railroad they're building to move stuff across Angola, the DRC, and Zambia.
Right. And that was billions of dollars.
Yeah.
Biden was making it pretty clear. He saw Africa as a major player globally, and the Libido corridor is important strategically. That's all about who controls important resources.
But then you have Trump saying America first all the time. And that has a lot of people worried he's just going to focus on protecting America's own interests. And don't forget about how skeptical he was of that African Growth and Opportunity Act, the AGOA thing, the one that lets African countries export some stuff to the U.S. without any taxes. He even suggested he might not renew it after 2025.
Yeah.
So how does that fit with what Biden was trying to do?
Yeah, see, that's where things get kind of messy. Biden's whole thing was about partnership and investing in Africa.
Right.
But Trump, with all that America First talk, makes it seem like he just wants to make deals that benefit America. But it's not that simple. Even during his first term, Trump did start those Prosper Africa and Development Finance Corporation initiatives, the DFC. Those were specifically supposed to get American companies to invest more in Africa and to counter China.
So it seems like he's got these two competing ideas in his head, wanting to put America first, but also knowing he needs to work with Africa strategically. But hold on, what about that 10% tariff on all imports he keeps talking about? Wouldn't that totally go against those initiatives? And wouldn't that hit South African exporters really hard, especially the ones using AGO?
Well, yeah, there are definitely people in South Africa who are worried about what that could do to their economy. But the Brookings Institution, they're a pretty well-respected think tank. They've said that the impact on South Africa's economy might not be as bad as some people are afraid of. They're estimating it might only shrink the economy by about 0.06%.
Okay, so maybe not a total disaster, but still not great. What about U.S. aid to Africa in general? I mean, the U.S. gives more aid to Africa than any other country, but Trump has always wanted to cut foreign aid.
He has, and before Congress stopped him.
Yeah.
But this time, with Republicans maybe having more power in Congress, it might be easier for him to get those cuts through. And that brings us to a really important issue, PEPFAR. That's the U.S. program that fights HIV/AIDS in Africa.
Right.
And a lot of Republicans are saying they don't like it. They're saying it's connected to abortion. And since Trump is so against abortion, it's not clear what's going to happen to PEPFAR, especially because it's only been funded until March of next year.
Wow. That's a big deal. PEPFAR has done so much to save lives and improve healthcare in Africa. To think it might be in danger, that's scary. And speaking of things being scary, Trump's whole stance on immigration is really worrying a lot of people, especially African migrants, especially the ones at the U.S.-Mexico border. He keeps saying he's going to deport 1 million undocumented immigrants.
Yeah, and we're seeing more and more African migrants trying to get into the U.S. because of wars or because they're being persecuted or just because they're poor. And remember what happened during Trump's first term? He banned travel from a bunch of African countries like Nigeria, Eritrea, Sudan, and Tanzania. So that creates a lot of uncertainty for these migrants. And it's scary for them. They're already going through so much.
They're already under so much pressure. And then this just adds to it. I read some reports from Kenya. They said that migrants there are really anxious. They're worried about discrimination if Trump is president.
Yeah, and it's not just immigration. This uncertainty is affecting how people think about security and conflict, too. While Trump was out of office, Russia really expanded its presence in Africa. They've been giving military support to countries fighting those jihadist militants. So the question is, what's Trump going to do about that? Especially with all that history between the U.S. and Russia.
While the U.S. was looking the other way, Russia snuck in and started changing the game. And with Trump seeming to be so friendly with Putin, it's really hard to say what he'll do.
And to make things even more complicated, we already know a little bit about how Trump deals with conflict in Africa.
Right.
Remember, during his first term, he helped Nigeria fight Boko Haram. He even gave them those Tucano jets, the ones that Obama wouldn't give them.
Oh, yeah.
So he will intervene sometimes, but only when he wants to.
Which brings us back to that main point. You never know what Trump is going to do. He does things his own way. And that's why people reacted in such different ways when he won. Oil prices went down, then they went back up, and the crypto market went crazy. Bitcoin hit a record high.
It really shows you just how uncertain everything is with Trump as president. People are trying to figure out, what does this mean for the global economy? It's like a puzzle.
Right.
But we don't have all the pieces.
Yeah, it feels like we're just starting to understand what's going on. And then something new happens that changes everything. So how do we make sense of all of this?
I think the best ways is to try to understand how Trump makes decisions. He focuses on deals. He wants America to look strong, and he likes to shake things up. If we understand what motivates him, we can get a better idea of what he'll do.
So we need to understand how he thinks, to understand how he'll deal with Africa.
Pretty much. But we can't forget that he can be impulsive.
Right.
He changes his mind all the time, so even if we think we understand him, we can still be wrong.
It's like, we're in a maze, but the walls keep moving.
Exactly. We have to be ready for anything. And that's where critical thinking is so important. We can't just believe everything we hear. We have to ask questions, consider different points of view, and be ready to change our minds when we learn new information.
So we have to keep learning and keep adapting to this crazy world.
Exactly. And that's why this kind of deep dive is so useful. It's not about finding the right answers. It's about understanding how complicated the world is.
Yeah.
And learning how to deal with it.
I like that.
It's a skill.
Yeah.
Being able to navigate all this.
Absolutely. You know, we've been talking a lot about Trump and his policies, but what about the African countries themselves? How are they going to respond to all of this?
Oh, that's a really good point. African countries aren't just sitting back and letting things happen to them.
Right.
They have their own plans.
Yeah.
And they're really good at adapting and finding new partners.
So it's not just about the U.S. and China anymore.
No, not at all. The world is becoming multipolar.
Multipolar.
Yeah, it means there are more and more powerful countries getting involved.
I see.
Like Turkey, India, the Gulf states. They're all becoming more active in Africa. So it's a lot more complicated now, but also more interesting.
Yeah, I bet that creates a lot of opportunities for African countries.
It does, but also challenges.
How so?
Well, they can use this competition between the big countries to get better deals, more investment, and more independence.
Right.
But they have to be careful not to become too dependent on any one country or get caught in the middle of their fights.
So they need to be really strategic.
Exactly. They need to figure out what's best for them, what their priorities are, and what they want to achieve in the long run. It's like a game of chess. They have to think several moves ahead.
Wow, yeah.
And they have to do that while also dealing with their own domestic issues, like their economies and social problems.
So it's not just about foreign policy.
Nope. It's about everything.
Makes sense.
At the end of the day, the best way for African countries to deal with all this change is to become stronger themselves. They need to improve their institutions, diversify their economies, and empower their people. That's how they'll create a better future.
It reminds me of that saying, give a man a fish and you feed him for a day. Teach a man a fish and you feed him for a lifetime.
Exactly. We need to help African countries learn to fish so they can take control of their own destinies and build the future they want.
That's a really good point. No matter what happens with the U.S. or the rest of the world, the future of Africa is in the hands of Africans. They're the ones who will shape their own story and unlock the potential of their continent.
Absolutely. As we wrap up this part of our deep dive, it's important to remember the story of Africa is still being written. It's a story of resilience, innovation, and transformation. And we all have a responsibility to pay attention, to understand what's happening, and to support Africa.
I agree. Okay, so we've reached the end of part one of our deep dive into Trump's second term and what it could mean for Africa. We've covered a lot, and there's still a lot to think about. But one thing's for sure, the future is wide open. Thanks for listening.
Don't stop learning now. Keep asking questions, and stay engaged with the world. You know, to really get Trump's approach to dealing with other countries, especially in Africa, you got to remember one thing. He always wants to know what's in it for the U.S. It's all about those direct benefits. It's like he's always making a deal, weighing the costs and benefits before he does anything.
So it's less about like shared values and working together and more about making deals that help America right now.
Exactly. Like he's running a business. Yeah. And that can make it hard for African countries to know what to expect. Take Sudan, for example. There's a civil war going on there right now. And some experts, like Guide Moore, think that Trump might not want to get involved because it doesn't really benefit the U.S. directly.
It's like he's always asking, what's in it for me? And if he doesn't see an answer he likes, he just walks away. But what about things here in the U.S.? We talked about how the Republicans might have more power in Congress now. How could that affect what Trump does in Africa?
That's a really important point. If Trump doesn't have as much opposition from Congress, he might be able to do some of the things he couldn't do before, like cutting foreign aid.
Right.
If the Republicans have a strong majority, they might let him make those cuts.
Yeah.
And that could have a huge impact on Africa. Healthcare, education, economic development, all of that could suffer.
It's not a good thought. And it's not just about the money. It's about the message it sends. If it seems like the U.S. doesn't care about Africa, that could really hurt relationships.
Definitely. It's a tough situation. On one hand, Trump wants to show that America is strong and put American interests first.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, he could end up pushing away potential allies. And that could give other countries like Russia or China a chance to step in.
We talked about Russia's influence in Africa before. Can we dig into that a bit more? What are they actually doing there, and how does that affect the U.S.?
Well, for the past 2 years, Russia has been building up its military presence in Africa. They've been helping countries fight against those jihadist groups, and they've been making alliances and getting access to resources.
Resources.
Yeah, like oil and minerals. A lot of people see this as a direct challenge to the U.S.
So we've got all these different things going on. Domestic politics here in the U.S., Trump's focus on making deals, and Russia trying to increase its power. And then on top of all that, we have Trump himself. He's so unpredictable. He does whatever he wants. It's really hard to know what he'll do next.
Remember how we talked about how the markets reacted when Trump won?
Yeah, oil prices, crypto.
Right. That's a perfect example of how uncertain everything is with Trump. Nobody knows what a Trump presidency means for the global economy. It's like trying to solve a puzzle,
Right.
but some of the pieces are missing.
And just when you think you figured it out,
Yeah.
a new piece appears and changes everything. So how are we supposed to understand all of this?
I think we have to go back to the basics. We need to understand what drives Trump. He wants to make deals. He wants America to be strong. And he's not afraid to break the rules. If we can figure out what motivates him, we might be able to predict what he'll do.
So we need to understand how he sees the world.
Exactly.
To figure out how he'll deal with Africa.
Right. But we also have to remember that he can be impulsive.
True.
He changes his mind all the time. So even if we think we know what he's going to do, we could be wrong.
It's like navigating a minefield. You think you're safe.
Yeah.
And then boom.
Exactly. You always have to be careful. And that's why it's so important to think critically. Don't just believe everything you hear. Question everything. Consider all sides of the story. And be open to changing your mind when you learn new information.
It's like we have to be constantly learning and adapting.
That's the key.
Yeah.
And that's what makes these deep dives so valuable. It's not about finding all the answers. It's about learning how to think for yourself.
Yeah.
And how to navigate a complex world.
It's a skill.
It is.
And a really important one.
Especially these days.
It just occurred to me, we've talked a lot about Trump and what he might do. But we haven't really talked about how African countries might react to all this.
Oh, yeah. That's a really important point.
Yeah.
African countries aren't just going to sit back and do nothing.
Right.
They have their own ideas
Right.
and their own strategies. They're really good at adapting to new situations and finding new partners.
So you're saying it's not just about the U.S. and China anymore?
No way.
Mm-hmm.
The world is becoming what we call multipolar. Yeah, means there are a lot of different countries that are becoming more powerful.
All right.
Like Turkey, India,
Yeah.
and the Gulf states. They're all getting more involved in Africa. So it's a much more complicated situation now.
I bet that's good and bad for African countries.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
On the one hand, they can use this competition between the big countries to get better deals for themselves, more investment, and more freedom to do their own things.
Right.
But on the other hand, they have to be careful. They don't want to become too dependent on any one country or get caught in the middle of a fight between them.
So they need to be really smart about how they handle all of this.
Exactly. It's all about strategy.
Strategy.
Yeah. They need to figure out what's most important for their country, what they want to achieve, and how to make it happen. It's like they're playing a really complicated game of chess.
Wow.
They have to think several moves ahead.
And they have to do all of this while also dealing with their own problems at home.
Exactly. Economic problems, social problems, all of it.
So it's about a lot more than just foreign policy.
Definitely. It all connects.
Makes sense.
But here's the thing. The best way for African countries to deal with all this change is to focus on becoming stronger themselves.
Okay.
They need to strengthen their institutions, make their economies more diverse, and give their people more power. That's how they'll create a better future.
It's like that saying, give a man a fish and you feed him for a day. Teach a man to fish and you feed him for a lifetime.
Exactly. We need to help African countries learn to fish.
I like that.
So they can be in control of their own destinies and create the future they want.
That's a really great way to put it. I mean, no matter what happens with the U.S. or any other country, the future of Africa really depends on Africans. They're the ones who will decide what happens next, and they have so much potential.
I agree. And as we finish up this deep dive, it's important to remember that the story of Africa is still being written. It's a story of resilience, innovation, and transformation. And it's a story that we should all be paying attention to.
I think you're right. We all have a responsibility to learn about what's happening in Africa and to support them in any way we can. So that brings us to the end of our deep dive into Donald Trump's second term and what it might mean for Africa. We've explored a lot of complex issues, and we've seen that the future is full of uncertainty. But one thing is clear. Africa is a continent on the rise, and the world needs to pay attention. Thanks for joining us on this journey.
And remember, keep learning, keep asking questions, and stay engaged with the world around you.